The Specialist by Charles Chic Sale. First published in 1929. Foreword. Lem Putt, that wasn't his real name, really lived. He was just as sincere in his work as a great painter whose heart is in his canvas. And in this little sketch, I have simply tried to bring you recollections of a man I once knew who was so rich in odd and likable traits of character as to make a most lasting impression on my memory. Chic Sale. The Specialist. You've heard a lot of pratin' and prattlin' about this being the age of specialization. I'm a carpenter by trade. At one time, I could have built a house, barn, church, or chicken coop, but I seen the need of a specialist in my line, so I studied her. I got her. She's mine. Gentlemen, you are face to face with the champion privy builder of Sangamon County. Luke Harkins was my first customer. He heard about me specializing and decided to take a chance. I built for him just the average 8-family 3-holer. With that job, my reputation was made, and since then, I have devoted all my time and thought to that special line. Of course, when business is slack, I do a little paper hanging on the side. But my heart is just in privy building, and when I finish a job, I ain't through. I give all my customers 6 months privy service free gratis. I explained this to Luke, and one day he calls me up and says, "Lem, I wish you'd come out here. I'm having privy trouble." So I gets in the car and drives out to Luke's place and hid behind them Baldwins where I could get a good view of the situation. It was right in the middle of haying time, and them hired hands was going in there and staying anywheres from 45 minutes to an hour. Think of that. I says, "Luke, you sure have got privy trouble." So I takes out my kit of tools and goes in to examine the structure. First, I looks at the catalog hanging there, thinking it might be that. But it wasn't even from a recognized house. Then I looks at the seats proper, and I see what the trouble was. I had made them holes too darn comfortable. So I gets out a scroll saw and cuts them square with hard edges. Then I go back and takes up my position as before. Me here, the Baldwins here, and the privy there. And I watched them hired hands going in and out for nearly 2 hours, and not one of them was staying for more than 4 minutes. "Luke," I says, "I've solved her." That's what comes of being a specialist, gentlemen. 'Twarn't long after I built that twin job for the schoolhouse, and then after that biggest plant up to date, an 8-holer, Elmer Ridgway was down and looked it over. And he come to me one day and says, "Lem, I seen that 8-hole job you done down there at the corners, and it sure is dandy. And figuring as how I'm going to build on the old Robinson property, I thought I'd ask you to kind of estimate on a job for me." "You come to the right man, Elmer," I says. "I'll be out as soon as I can get the roof on the old 2-seater I'm putting up for the sheriff." Couple of days later, I drives out to Elmer's place, getting there about dinner time. I knocks a couple of times on the door, and I see they got a lot of folks to dinner, so not wishing to disturb 'em, I just sneaks around to the side door and yells, "Hey, Elmer, here I am. Where do you want that privy put?" Elmer comes out, and we get to talking about a good location. He was all for putting her right alongside a jagged path running by a big northern spy. "I wouldn't do it, Elmer," I says, "and I'll tell you why. In the first place, her being near a tree is bad. There ain't no sound in nature so disconcerting as the sound of apples dropping on the roof. Then another thing, there's a crooked path running by that tree, and the soil there ain't adapted to absorbing moisture. During the rainy season, she's likely to be slippery. Take your grandpappy. Going out there is about the only recreation he gets. He'll go out some rainy night with his nighties flapping around his legs, and like as not, when you come out in the morning, you'll find him prone in the mud, or maybe skidded off one of them curves and wound up in the corn crib. No, sir, I says, put her in a straight line with the house, and if it's all the same to you, have her go past the wood pile. I'll tell you why. Take a woman, for instance. Out she goes. On the way back, she'll gather 5 sticks of wood, and the average woman will make 4 or 5 trips a day. There's 20 sticks in the wood box without any trouble. On the other hand, take a timid woman. If she sees any men folk around, she's too bashful to go direct out. So she'll go to the wood pile, pick up the wood, go back in the house, and watch her chance. The average timid woman, especially a new hired girl, I've knowed to make as many as 10 trips to the woodpile before she goes in, regardless. On a good day, you'll have your wood box filled by noon, and right there's a saving of time. Now about the digging of her. You can't be too careful about that, I says. Dig her deep and dig her wide. It's a mighty sight better to have a little privy over a big hole than a big privy over a little hole. Another thing, when you dig her deep, you got her dug, and you ain't got that disconcerting thought stealing over you that sooner or later you'll have to dig again. And when it comes to construction, I says, I can give you joists or beams. Joists make a good job. Beams cost a bit more, but they're worth it. Beams, you might say, will last forever. Of course, I could give you joists, but take your Aunt Emmy. She ain't getting a mite lighter. Someday, she might be out there when them joists give away, and there she'd be, catched. Another thing you've got to figure on, Elmer, I says, is that Oddfellows picnic in the fall. Them boys is going to get in there in 4s and 6s, singing and drinking and the like. And I want to tell you there's nothing breaks up an Oddfellows picnic quicker than a diggin' party. Beams, I say, every time, and rest secure. And about her roof, I says, I can give you a lean to type or a pitch roof. Pitch roofs cost a little more, but some of our best people has lean tos. If it was for myself, I'd have a lean-to, and I tell you why. A lean-to has 2 less corners for the wasps to build their nests in. And on a hot August afternoon, there ain't nothing so disconcerting as a lot of wasps buzzing around while you're setting there doing a little reading, figuring, or thinking. Another thing I says, a lean-to gives you a high door. Take that son of yours, shooting up like a weed. Don't any of him seem to be turning under. If he was trying to get under a pitch roof door, he'd crack his head every time. Take a lean-to, Elmer. That ain't stylish, but they're practical. Now, about her furnishings. I can give you a nail or hook for the catalog. And besides, a box for cobs. You can take your pa, for instance. He's of the old school, and naturally he'd prefer the box. So put 'em both in, Elmer. Won't cost you a bit more for the box and keeps peace in the family. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, I says. And as long as we're on furnishings, I'll tell you about a technical point that was put to me the other day. The question was this: what is the life, or how long will the average mail order catalog last in just the plain, ordinary, 8-family 3-holer? It stumped me for a spell. But this being a reasonable question, I checked up and found that by placing the catalog in there, say in January, when you get your new one, you should be in the harness section by June. But, of course, that ain't through Apple time, and not counting on too many city visitors either. And another thing, they've been putting so many of those stiff-colored sheets in the catalog here lately that it makes it hard to figure. Something really ought to be done about all this, and I thought about taking it up with Mr. Sears Roebuck himself. As to the latch fur, I can give you a spool and string, or a hook and eye. The cost of a spool and string is practically nothing, but they ain't positive in action. If somebody comes out and starts rattling the door, either the spool or the string is apt to give way, and there you are. But with the hook and eye, she's yours, you might say, for the whole afternoon, if you're so minded. Put on the hook and eye of the best quality, 'cause there ain't nothing that'll rack a man's nerves more than sitting in there pondering without a good, strong, substantial latch on the door. And he agreed with me. Now, I says, what about windows? Some want 'em, some don't. They ain't so popular as they used to be. If it was me, Elmer, I'd say no windows, and I'll tell you why. Take, for instance, somebody coming out. Maybe they're just in a hurry, or maybe they waited too long. If the door don't open right away, and you won't answer 'em 9 times out of 10, they'll go round and round and look in the window, and you don't get the privacy you ought to. Now about ventilations, or the designs I cut in the door. I can give you stars, diamonds, or crescents. There ain't much choice. All give good service. A lot of people like stars because they throw a ragged shatter. Others like crescents because they're graceful and simple. Last year we was cutting a lot of stars, but this year we're kind of quieting down and running more crescents. I do cut twine and hearts now and then for young married couples, and bunches of grapes for the newly rich. These last 2 designs come under the head of novelties, and I don't very often suggest them, because it takes time and runs into money. I wouldn't take any snap judgment on our ventilators, Elmer, I says, because they've got a lot to do with the beauty of the structure. And don't overdo it like Doc Turner did. He wanted stars and crescents both, against my better judgment, and now he's sorry. But it's too late, because when I cut 'em, they're cut. And gentlemen, you can get mighty tired sitting all day after looking at a ventilator that ain't to your liking. I never use knotty timber. All clean white pine, and I'll tell you why. You take a knot hole, if it doesn't fall out, it'll get pushed out. And if it comes in the door, 9 times out of 10, it'll be too high to sit there and look out, and just the right height for some snooper to sneak around, peek in, and there you are, catched. Now, I says, how do you want that door to swing? Opening in or out? He said he didn't know, so I says it should open in. This is the way it works out. Place yourself in there. The door opening in, say about 45 degree, this gives you air and lets the sun beat in. Now, if you hear anybody coming, you can give it a quick shove with your foot and there you are. But if she swings out, where are you? You can't run the risk of having her open for air or sun, because if anyone comes, you can't get up off the seat, reach way around, and grab her without getting caught, now can you? He could see I was right. So I built his door, like all my doors, swinging in, and of course facing east to get the full benefit of the sun. And I tell you, gentlemen, there ain't nothing more restful than to get out there in the morning, comfortably seated, with the door about 3/4 open. The old sun beating in on you sort of relaxes the body, makes you feel mighty, mighty restful. Now, I says, about the paint of her. What color do you want her, Elmer? He said red. Elmer, I says, I can paint her red, and red makes a beautiful job, or I can paint her bright green, or any one of them 6 other colors, and they're all mighty pretty. But it ain't practical to use a single solid color, and I'll tell you why. She's too darn hard to see at night. You need contrast, just like they use on them railroad crossing bars, so you can see them in the dark. If I was you, I'd paint her a bright red with white trimmings, just like your barn. Then she'll match up nice in the daytime, and you can spot her easy at night when you ain't got much time to go scouting around. There's a lot of fine points to putting up a first-class privy that the average man don't think about. It's no job for an amateur, take my word for it. There's a whole lot more in it than you can see just by taking a few squints at your neighbors. Why, one of the worst tragedies around here in years was because Old Man Clark's boys thought they knowed something about this kind of work and they didn't. Old Man Clark, if he's a day he's 97, lives over there across the holler with his boys. Asked me to come over and estimate on their job. My price was too high, so they decided to do it themselves, and that's where the trouble begun. I was doing a little paper hanging at the time for that widder that lives down past the old creamery. As I drive by, I could see the boys working. Of course, I didn't want to butt in, so used to just holler at 'em on the way by and say neighborly like, "Hey boys, see you're doing a little building." You see, I didn't want to act like I was butting in on their work, but I knowed all the time they was going to have trouble with that privy, and they did. From all outside appearances, it was a regulation job, but not being experienced along this line, they didn't anchor her. You see, I put a 4x4 that runs from the top right straight on down 5 foot into the ground. That's why you never see any of my jobs upset Halloween night. They might pull 'em out, but they'll never upset 'em. Here's what happened. They didn't anchor theirs, and they painted it solid red. 2 bad mistakes. Halloween night came along, darker than pitch. Old Man Clark was out in there. Some of them devilish neighbor boys was out for no good, and they upset her with the old man in it. Of course, the old man got to Colin, and his boys heard the noise. One of 'em says, "What's the racket? Somebody must be at the chickens." So they took the lanterns, started out to the chicken shed. They didn't find anything wrong there, and they started back to the house. Then they heard the dog bark, and one of his boys says, "Sounds like the barking is over towards the privy." It being painted red, they couldn't see she was upset, so they started over there. In the meantime, the old man had gotten so confused that he started to crawl out through the hole, yelling for help all the time. The boys recognized his voice and come running, but just as they got there, he lost his hold and fell. After that, they just called, didn't go near him. So you see what a tragedy that was? And they tell me he's been practically ostracized from society ever since. Well, time passed, and I finally got Elmer's job done. And gentlemen, everybody says that next to my 8-holer, it's the finest piece of construction work in the county. Sometimes, when I get to feeling blue and thinking I hitched my wagon to the wrong star, and maybe I should have took up chiropractic or veterinary, I just packed the little woman and the kids in the back of my car and start out, aiming to fetch up at Elmer's place along about dusk. When we gets to the top of the hill overlooking his place, we stops. I slips the gear in mutual, and we just sit there looking at the beautiful sight. There sits that privy on that knoll near the woodpile, painted red and white, morning glories growing up over her, and Mr. Sun bathing her in a burst of yeller color as he drops back of them hills. You can hear the dog barking in the distance, bringing the cows up for milking, and the slow squeak of Elmer's windmill pumping away day after day the same as me. As I look at that beautiful picture of my work, I'm proud. I heaves a sigh of satisfaction. My eyes fill up, and I says to myself, folks are right when they say that next to my 8-holer, that's the finest piece of construction work I ever done. I know I done right in specializing. I'm sitting on top of the world, and I hope that boy of mine, who is growing up like a weed, keeps up the good work when I'm gone. With one last look as we pulls away, I slips my arm around the missus, and I says, "Nora, Elmer don't have to worry. He's a boy that got hisself a privy, a mighty, mighty, pretty privy." The end.